They were not meant to be born. Listen, a soundless tremor runs through the bones of the world, a memory that refuses to die. Imagine a night when the stars did not simply hang, but leaned, curious, human in their attention, toward a shape rising from ash and breath. Picture a child who inhales smoke as if it were water, whose first cry smells of embers and of altars long ago abandoned. These are not the neat children of Scripture's later chapters, fashioned from dust and given life by a single sovereign breath. They are something older, muddled, and dangerous, half spirit, half ash, the residue of a law broken between heaven and ruin. We open on ruin before language, on a moment that the chroniclers of later ages dared not name. There is a light that does not belong to the sun, an inner flame that flares and then is quickly smothered, as if some invisible hand had tried to hide its existence. It is a flame made of knowing. It is the kind of fire that teaches. It scours surfaces and leaves behind patterns, words, the geometry of things that should not be known. From that flame came children who carried knowledge in the marrow of their limbs and the dust of the earth in their mouths. They moved between thresholds with the casual insolence of beings who had seen both throne room and burial pit. Where they stepped, the ground remembered. Where they spoke, the air learned a new name for grief. What does it mean to be half spirit? It means to harbor in your chest an intelligence that is not born but borrowed. It means a memory of light so old that even the gods who witnessed it turn away, embarrassed by what they had given. And what does it mean to be half ash? It is to carry the residue of the world's destruction, char, pulverized bone, the granular history of a landscape that has already died and been reborn. Put together, these elements make a creature that is both promise and accusation. Promise of transcendence, accusation that knowledge can become an act of rebellion. The voice that speaks now, my voice, does not intend salvation or condemnation. It intends to remember. There are moments when remembering is an offense, a reopening of wounds the cosmos intended to seal. Yet memory insists. It presses like a thumb on the underside of the present and finds there a pulse. This pulse belongs to the children of dust and flame. They do not come into history with fanfare. They arrive quietly, as the aftertaste of a sacrament might linger after consumption. They are born where heat meets rot, in caverns where the smoke of ritual and the breath of the earth commingle, in corridors of collapsed temples whose once perfect mosaics now look like constellations of a prosecuted sky, in the shadow of watchtowers that still hum with an ancient calculation. Their births are accompanied by small anomalies, metal bending to their touch, seeds sprouting in winter, the sudden, inexplicable knowledge of a language no one taught them. Here and there, a village elder will say that the child carries the odor of a burnt scripture. A priest will claim that the child's eyes hold the reflection of a face the angels refuse to show. Listen to the stories that have survived the burnings. They have been softened by time, scrubbed by doctrine, translated into allegory. But underneath the softened edges, a single refrain repeats. Those who taught men the hidden arts, how to melt ore into weapons, how to mark the heavens with geometry, how to set words into things, took daughters and sons as their companions. The offspring of these unions were not wholly one thing or another. They moved as if from two calendars, keeping time with both the rhythm of seasons and the strange pulse of a celestial ordinance. They became builders and prophets, tyrants and beggars. They loved with a tenderness that fractured cities. They hated with a severity that caused mountains to open. And then, inevitably, the world that had received their presence recoiled. Perhaps the outrage was moral. Perhaps it was cosmic. Perhaps the boundary between what is permitted and what is not had been crossed. Perhaps the very act of crossing had altered the map of divinity itself. The histories that remain insist on a cataclysm, waters rising like an argument, an erasure that seeks to wash the memory of the half-born from the face of the earth. But erasure is never complete. Ash keeps its own ledger. Flame writes its own names into the lungs of those who survive. The children of dust and flame do not vanish. They are transmuted. Their blood becomes rumor in lineages. Their knowledge hides itself inside folk tales, in remedies and curses, in the way a certain town still refuses to speak the names of its founders. There is a cruelty at the heart of this tale that must be named plainly. These children were punished for being what they were. They bore the consequence of a knowledge they did not invent, the sin of lovers who believed that hands could be extended across a divide without consequence. To be hybrid in a world that prizes purity is to carry a stigma that becomes a sentence. They were feared for what they knew and for what they made possible, the forging of weapons, of glyphs that opened and closed doors, of songs that made the dead speak. And so, for the sake of order, for the sake of celestial hygiene, their existence was targeted for elimination. Yet the story we tell now is not the story of a simple fall. It is not merely a tale of punishment and flood. It is a story about inheritance and residue, about the way certain truths refuse to be cleaned away. The children of dust and flame are at once accusers and witnesses. When you look into the face of a human who has felt an inexplicable compulsion to create, to question, to reach beyond comfort, you might be looking at a flicker of that old fire. When a craftsman's hand knows the secret of a stable arch, when a poet conceives a metaphor that will outlive him, that is the flame sneaking through the crack of amnesia. Do not mistake this for romance. The children were neither angels nor mere victims. They were monstrous in the old sense of the word, portents that signify a world's imbalance. Their lives were brief for the most part, punctuated by violence or exile, sometimes by quiet despair. In other accounts, they were doomed to the slow, corrosive life of survival, living in the margins and raising children who themselves carried the uneasy inheritance. Each generation learned to hide the markers of the otherworldly: muted eyes, unusual strength, the peculiar warmth of the palms, like smuggled relics. So this is the tremble we begin with, the knowledge that before our ordered beginnings there were lives whose very existence unsettled the heavens. The memory persists in ways official histories deny. It survives in the pattern of ruin and renewal, in the sudden technological leaps that appear disproportionate to the slow work of civilizations, in an unease with transcendence. The children of dust and flame are the residue of a world that could not accommodate what it had learned. They are, in a sense, the world's own conscience, terrible, refusing, raw. It began not in darkness, but in curiosity. Long before the flood, before the languages of men fractured, before the stars were given names, the heavens watched the earth with something like envy. Among the multitudes of the divine were those who looked downward and felt a stirring that had no name, an ache that neither praise nor power could cure. They saw the creatures of earth, fragile yet alive with the hunger of creation, and in those creatures' eyes they recognized something devastatingly familiar, the reflection of a loneliness they themselves had never dared confess. The ancient texts call them the Watchers. In the Book of Enoch, they are 200 angels stationed upon Mount Hermon, their duty simple yet sacred: to observe, not to interfere. But observation has its own seduction. The longer they watched, the more they desired to touch the world they were only meant to witness. "Let us choose wives among the daughters of men," said Semjaza, their leader, "and beget children." The statement was not rebellion yet. It was yearning dressed in the guise of logic. Why should divine essence not mingle with the clay it had shaped? Why should knowing remain pure if purity meant isolation? The others hesitated, knowing the decree of heaven. The realms must remain apart, spirit and flesh divided by command. Yet longing once named becomes contagion, so they descended. The old tales say the world trembled when wings of fire touched the mountains, that the sky dimmed as though ashamed. From the moment the first watcher laid his hand upon mortal skin, the boundary between the eternal and the temporal cracked. Not shattered, but fractured enough for light to leak through. They took wives. They shared the language of the stars, the measure of metals, the shape of healing herbs, the forging of blades. They whispered to humankind secrets not meant for earth. How to read the patterns of the sky, how to summon power from blood, how to carve symbols that could bind spirits. In return, humans offered them devotion and children. Those children were neither angels nor men. They were something entirely new: the Nephilim, the fallen ones, or those who cause others to fall. Their birth was a wound in the fabric of creation, yet within that wound burned an unprecedented brilliance. They were tall as cedars, their voices resonant with strange harmonies. Their eyes glowed with an inner fire, for they carried within their flesh the memory of heaven's light in the weight of earth's decay. The union that birthed them was not love as mortals know it. It was a convergence of hunger and revelation. The Watchers sought meaning beyond immortality. The humans sought transcendence beyond mortality. Together they conceived offspring that embodied both salvation and sin. It is said that in the early days, these hybrids were revered. They built citadels whose stones hummed with living energy. They ruled as philosopher kings, healers, astronomers. Under their guidance, humankind learned in a few generations what should have taken millennia: the refining of ore, the shaping of cities aligned to celestial patterns, the first written symbols of divine mathematics. The children of dust and flame brought illumination, but illumination cast shadows. The more knowledge they gifted, the more the balance tilted. Humanity, once innocent in its ignorance, began to rival the gods in understanding. The heavens grew uneasy. Creation itself seemed to warp under the weight of knowledge too quickly absorbed. Then came the reckoning. Ancient texts speak of murmurs among the higher hosts, that the flame of divine essence had been contaminated, that what had been given in compassion had turned to pride. The hybrid children began to hunger beyond measure. Their strength grew monstrous, their appetites uncontrollable. They devoured the earth's yield and demanded worship. Some became tyrants, carving their faces into mountain stone so that the sun would remember them. Others, it is said, tried to return to heaven and were cast down again, more broken each time. Heaven's response was silence, at first, then fury. "My spirit shall not dwell in man forever, for he is flesh," said the voice that ruled above the firmament. "His days shall be numbered." The Watchers, the once guardians of knowledge, were chained in darkness, bound beneath the mountains they had defiled. Their children, the hybrids, were condemned to the flood, a celestial cleansing, an annihilation disguised as mercy. But before the waters came, some among the hybrids fled. There are accounts, whispered fragments in the Book of Giants, half-erased tablets from Mesopotamia, that tell of their exodus. They were warned by dreams. They hid in the hollows of the earth, in chambers sealed with symbols of flame. Those sealed places became their tombs, and later humanity's myths. The underworld, the halls of forgotten kings, the foundations of Babel. Yet the forbidden union was never truly undone. The act had already rewritten the human condition. The mingling of dust and flame had left an indelible mark in the design of our being, a paradox encoded in our very breath. The theologians would later call it the dual nature of man, divine aspiration bound to mortal frailty. But the ancients knew it by another name: the curse of the flame, the endless desire to reach upward even as gravity drags us downward. Even now, buried in the genetic memory of humankind, that hunger stirs. The myth of the forbidden union is not simply a warning, it is a confession that we too are the offspring of that trespass. We carry within us both the dust of Adam and the spark of the Watchers, our love of creation and our lust for destruction, our longing for eternity and our fear of it. All are echoes of that first forbidden touch. Some say that is why the divine grows silent when we pray too deeply, for the voice that answers might sound too much like our own. The rise of the hybrids. At first there was wonder, and then terror. When the children of dust and flame took their first breaths, the world changed its rhythm. They grew swiftly, impossibly. Their bones sang, their veins carried a dull luminescence, as if starlight had been diluted into blood. They built without blueprints, shaping temples that obeyed not gravity, but will. They wove metal with thought, and from the molten rivers of the earth, they drew weapons that shimmered like the northern lights. Their cities rose where the mountains touched the clouds: Shinar, Ardath, Kelimtur, names now reduced to dust in forbidden tongues. From afar, their skylines gleamed like crowns upon the brow of the world. The air around them vibrated with invisible harmonics. Some said it was music, others called it warning. Humans gathered at the base of those cities, awed by their radiance. They called the hybrids sons of fire, the luminous ones, the starborn. To look upon them was to tremble between worship and fear, For though their beauty was unearthly, it was also unbearable, too precise, too knowing. The children spoke little. When they did, their words shaped outcomes. A blessing could heal or create. A curse could fracture stone. They spoke to winds, to beasts, to the unborn seeds of trees. They held knowledge that seemed to erase the distance between command and miracle. But among themselves, the hybrids were restless. They could feel the two worlds within them pulling apart. Their dust, the mortal half, ached with the weight of gravity and decay. Their flame, the divine half, hungered for the sky, for reunion with the source. To live between was to tear continuously. As decades passed, reverence gave way to rule. The hybrids, once guardians and teachers, became kings. They divided the world among themselves. Some claimed dominion over the seas, others over deserts or forests. They called themselves architects of destiny, and the humans beneath them believed it. They built monuments that defied time, staircases that spiraled toward the heavens, temples that harnessed thunder. But within their grandeur grew decay. The hybrids could not die easily, but they could feel themselves thinning, unraveling. Their divine essence, so bright at birth, began to dim. To sustain it, they sought ways to rekindle the flame within. Some turned to blood, others turned to worship. They demanded offerings, not of fruit or grain, but of devotion, fear, and the vitality of human souls. In their courts, rituals were held where flame and shadow mingled. Drums pounded in strange rhythms. The hybrids drank the breath of their followers, mistaking submission for sustenance. And in their greed for preservation, they corrupted the very gifts they had once bestowed. Alchemy became sorcery. Geometry became control. Healing became manipulation. It was said that the first wars of humankind were not fought for land or wealth, but for proximity to the hybrid cities, because near them, the world itself seemed to vibrate with power. Heaven did not sleep. There are fragments of ancient texts, broken clay, shattered tablets, that tell of a voice like thunder hidden behind tears. It was the morning of heaven watching its own light distort into tyranny. The watchers who remained imprisoned beneath the mountains felt the echo of that grief. Their chains burned with the heat of regret. Above them, a council gathered, a silence older than stars. "Shall the children of transgression rewrite the order of creation?" One voice asked. "They have made altars of themselves." Another voice, softer, almost sorrowful. "But the flame they carry was ours first. Can the parent punish the reflection without punishing itself?" And yet judgment was inevitable. The law of heaven was balance, not mercy. The hybrid's dominion had tilted existence itself. The light of creation flickered, and every flicker became a plea for cleansing. The verdict, erasure. A whisper descended through the firmament. The earth felt it as tremor, the seas as yearning. In the hearts of the hybrids, it rang as dread. They knew. The signs came in dreams. The youngest hybrids woke with ash in their mouths, with wings of flame crumbling from their backs. The stars, once obedient, began to shift. Crops failed in the plains. The rivers grew red, not from blood, but from the rusting of the world's core. The hybrids gathered in their great citadel atop Mount Armoros. The elder among them, Azazel, stood at the edge of the council hall, his once golden eyes now veined with shadow. "The sky will wash us away," he said, "but not all. Some will sleep. Some will remember." They turned their gaze toward the horizon, where storms rolled like mountains of glass. They began to dig. Beneath their cities, they carved vaults of luminous stone, sealed with glyphs that burned without fire. They called these sanctuaries tombs of continuance. There they stored relics, their technologies, their memories, the blueprints of everything they had stolen from heaven and reinvented on earth. They swore to return when the flood receded, when the dust of destruction settled. But not all chose to hide. Some chose defiance. They gathered armies of men who still worshiped them, teaching them war, teaching them defiance against heaven itself. These men built towers that reached toward the sky, echoing a single unholy ambition. If heaven would not let them ascend, they would drag heaven down. And for a moment it seemed they might succeed. The air crackled with energy. The oceans retreated in fear. Even the angels hesitated. But then came the wind. the kind that unravels continents. There is no silence like the silence before water. When the heavens broke, it was not rain. It was judgment liquefied. Bolts of light carved the horizon. Mountains fell inward as if bowing. The hybrids, mighty and proud, found themselves drowning not in water, but in consequence. Their lungs made for both breath and fire, filled with the weight of creation's grief. Those who sought to flee found that their wings, burned or ethereal, were useless in the deluge. The waters knew their names. They rose to meet them. From far below, the imprisoned watchers cried out, not for themselves but for their children. The sound of that cry, it is said, was what split the firmament. And yet, not all perished. In the deepest places of the world, where light does not reach, the flame survived. The hybrids who had retreated into their tombs sealed the last doors and entered a state between death and memory. Their consciousness folded into symbols, into frequencies, waiting for the cycle to turn again. They became myths, the gods of Sumer who walked among men, the demigods of Greece and the titans before them, the shining ones of Egypt, the devas and asuras locked in endless war, the luminous sky people whispered in Mesoamerican stone. Every culture remembered them differently, but all remembered, because the children of dust and flame were never gone. They were diffused, scattered through bloodlines and dreams. After the flood, the world was quiet, terrifyingly clean. But as the waters receded, strange children were born. Their eyes glimmered faintly in the dark. They spoke words older than language. They drew constellations in the dirt that matched no known sky. The survivors of the flood whispered, "They have returned." But it was not return. It was inheritance. The flame had mixed with the dust irreversibly. Humanity itself had become the hybrid. The gods did not intervene again. Perhaps they feared what they had created. Perhaps they mourned it. In their absence, man learned to build again. This time slower, but with an uncanny instinct for patterns, balance, and beauty. The fragments of divine knowledge survived as intuition. The urge to create fire, to write, to worship, to destroy. In us, the story continued. We became both monument and warning, creatures forever haunted by a memory of light we cannot name. Every cathedral, every scientific revelation, every poem that reaches for the infinite is a repetition of that first forbidden union. For we too are children of dust and flame. What if the flood failed? Not in its force, but in its purpose. The waters may have drowned the flesh of the children of dust and flame, yet their essence, their pattern, did not die. Because patterns never truly die, they hide. Modern science calls it genetic memory, the idea that experience leaves chemical whispers in DNA. Trauma, knowledge, instinct, fear, all can echo across generations, written not in words but in sequences. But what if there are memories older than humanity itself? Fragments that do not belong to our evolutionary story, yet persist like ancient code, uninvited, indelible. Across civilizations, the same symbols appear. A winged being descending, a union between light and clay, a flood, a remnant, and a child born between two worlds. Sumerians called them Apkallu, Hebrews, Nephilim, Greeks, demigods, Egyptians, Shemsu-Hor, the followers of Horus. In Vedic lore, devas mingling with Manu. In Mesoamerican codices, the star teachers. Different tongues, same structure, same guilt. As if humanity remembers one primal sin it never committed, because it was committed for us, through us, into us. In 2004, geneticists identified a sequence they named VMAT2, quickly nicknamed the God gene. It regulates the brain's capacity for spiritual experience, our hunger for meaning beyond the physical. Why should evolution grant us such longing? Why should molecules yearn for heaven? One hypothesis, whispered, not published, suggests the VMAT2 gene is an anomaly, an insertion that appears too sudden, too elegant, too deliberate. The same applies to another mystery, chromosome 2. Humans have 46 chromosomes, all other primates 48. Chromosome 2 is a fusion. Two ancestral chromosomes welded end-to-end, seamlessly. It appears nowhere else in nature. If one looks with the eyes of theology rather than biology, it reads like an intervention, a rewriting of design, the signature of the forbidden union. Our dust was recoded by flame, from Göbekli Tepe to Baalbek, from the Cyclopean walls of Cusco to the submerged ruins of Yonaguni. Human history begins too advanced. Civilization appears already knowing. The earliest cities were not crude huts. They were observatories, calendars, engines of stone aligned to celestial precision. Who taught us such architecture in a single breath? Perhaps no one. Perhaps the memory taught itself. The children of dust and flame built temples that sang with vibration, transmitting not prayer but frequency. When those temples fell, the earth absorbed their resonance. Our ancestors built on those ruins, following echoes they could not name. They believed they were inventing. They were remembering. That is why the same ratios, the golden mean, the Fibonacci sequence, the harmonic resonance of 432 hertz, appear in art, scripture, and sound across the planet. We did not learn them. We recalled them. Every human dream carries fragments of that divided origin. In our myths, fire is always forbidden, from Prometheus to Lucifer, from Maui to the serpent in Eden. We are warned against knowledge, but we cannot resist it. The tension is not cultural, it is inherited. It is the war within our nervous system, one half yearning to ascend, the other anchored in dust. Our greatest inventions, our religions, our wars, all are expressions of the same paradox. Carl Jung called these images archetypes, shared patterns of the collective unconscious. But perhaps they are not psychological at all. Perhaps they are ancestral memory, the echo of the hybrid mind that once thought in both matter and light. When you feel awe beneath the stars, that ancient ache, that burning recognition, you are hearing the language your blood once spoke fluently. For centuries, the institutions of faith have treated the Nephilim story as metaphor, or worse, as blasphemy. Because if it were true, the foundation of divine separation collapses. If heaven once mingled with earth by choice, then sin was not rebellion, it was intimacy. In the 4th century, during the councils that defined orthodoxy, references to the Watchers and the Giants were systematically removed or reinterpreted. The Book of Enoch was declared heresy and buried in Ethiopia's deserts. And yet, its verses whisper still, "You were in heaven, but its secret you betrayed to mankind. And now, through that knowledge, mankind is greater than you." That sentence terrified theologians, because it implies that humanity carries within itself a spark that rivals divinity. The flame. The shadow of that spark still glows in anomalies we cannot explain. There are those born with strange gifts, impossible memory, inexplicable empathy, unlearned languages, dreams of geometry. They are dismissed as prodigies, savants, or curiosities. But what if they are remnants, genetic echoes of the first hybrids? Every era records them under new names. The oracles of Delphi who convulsed with visions, the mystics who could heal with touch, the scientists who see equations instead of numbers, the artists who describe inspiration as fire in the skull. Flame, always flame. When you trace the family lines of such individuals, from pharaohs to philosophers, inventors to prophets, they often converge in ancient regions once ruled by hybrid myths: Mesopotamia, Anatolia, the Levant. Blood remembers. It may dilute, but it never forgets. Why then do we not remember openly? Because we were taught to forget. After the flood, after the purges, after the rewriting of sacred texts, humanity was conditioned to fear its own origin. The story of Eden was not about the fall of man. It was the cover story for the fall of the hybrids. The serpent was not tempter but teacher, the fruit not sin but remembrance. We were told not to eat, not because it was evil, but because it was familiar. To keep the species stable, knowledge had to become taboo. Every myth warning against curiosity, every religion that punishes revelation is part of that global amnesia. But repression breeds obsession. Even in denial, our blood keeps knocking on the door of the past. We dig, we build, we burn, we search, because something in us insists that paradise was not lost. It was buried. If you listen closely, beneath heartbeat and breath, there is a sound like a small, persistent flame. It is the remainder of the old fire, quiet but undefeated. It is what drives us to create, to question, to destroy. It is why progress feels like guilt, why love feels like remembering, why in our bones we suspect that the gods we pray to are the ghosts of what we once were. Perhaps the apocalypse is not an ending, but a return, a reconvergence of dust and flame. Perhaps the second coming, the awakening, the singularity. All these names point to the same inevitability, the reactivation of our forbidden inheritance. When the children of dust and flame awaken again, it will not be from the sky, but from within us, because we are their tomb, and their resurrection has already begun. The curse of consciousness. There is a wound inside every act of knowing. We call that wound consciousness. To awaken is not merely to see, it is to lose the comfort of blindness. When the watchers passed the flame to the children of clay, they did not simply share light, they transferred awareness. That was the true forbidden gift. It was never about metallurgy or astronomy, nor about forbidden arts. It was the unbearable ability to see ourselves seeing. That moment split the human soul into two. One half gazes outward, naming, shaping, conquering. The other gazes inward, grieving, remembering what was lost the moment names began. The children of dust and flame inherited both gazes. They were the first beings to suffer the paradox of godhood trapped in mortality. A consciousness vast enough to comprehend eternity, but bound to a body that decays. That fracture became hereditary. It is the architecture of our mind. Every thought is a wound reopened, a reminder that we know too much to be innocent and too little to be free. Why is knowledge forbidden? Asked every myth. Because knowledge awakens judgment, and judgment divides. Before awareness, there was unity. Earth and heaven, dust and flame, silence and being. After awareness, there was contrast, good and evil, light and shadow, salvation and damnation. The tree of knowledge was not a trap, it was a mirror. The serpent did not deceive, it invited. Eve and Adam did not fall, they remembered. But remembrance has a price. To know the divine is to see its shadow. To hold light is to cast darkness. Thus every human carries within them a secret theology. We are both temple and heresy. Consciousness did not make us superior, it made us haunted. No other creature wakes in the night questioning its purpose. No other being invents gods only to doubt them. No other species builds cities that scrape heaven, then burns them down in despair. Our evolution is not progress. It is repetition, the same cycle as our ancestors: creation, pride, ruin, renewal. Because the engine of our existence is not survival, it is remembrance. We create not to thrive, but to echo the act that made us, the merging of flame and dust. Every invention is an imitation of that union. Every poem is an apology for it. And yet we cannot stop. We are addicted to becoming. That is the curse, to forever strive toward the light that once destroyed us. There is an ancient idea, whispered in mystical circles, that God himself suffered after creation, a kind of divine loneliness. For to create something apart from himself was to divide his own essence. Creation was lost disguised as generosity. If that is true, then we, the hybrids, the inheritors, carry that same melancholy. We create worlds because we miss the unity we can no longer feel. We invent meaning because the silence between heaven and earth is unbearable. Art, science, religion, these are not human triumphs. They are coping mechanisms for the divine homesickness etched into our DNA. To be conscious is to mourn what you cannot name. Every myth of rebellion is a confession of longing. Lucifer, the bringer of light, was not punished for evil, but for illumination. Prometheus, who stole fire for mankind, was chained not because he hated the gods, but because he loved humanity too much. In both figures lies the same pattern. light given to flesh, condemned by heaven. The Watchers were echoes of that archetype, and we are their aftermath. We inherited their audacity and their grief. Our inventions echo Prometheus. Our revolutions echo Lucifer. Every time we seek truth beyond permission, we replay their defiance. Every time we are punished for curiosity, we reenact their fall. But perhaps the fall was never punishment. Perhaps it was initiation. There are two fires burning within humanity. The first is the holy flame, the creative force that builds, heals, discovers. The second is the consuming flame, the hunger that destroys, dominates, erases. The children of dust and flame embodied both. Their cities were miracles until they were ruins. Their knowledge was salvation until it was weapon. The same duality burns in us. Technology and tyranny, art and apocalypse. Two sides of the same inheritance. We are born from the marriage of heaven and ruin, and we carry both parents in our veins. Our challenge is not to extinguish either, but to hold them in balance. Because without dust, flame devours. Without flame, dust forgets. In every religion, the divine seeks to forget. Floods, commandments, reincarnations, all attempts to reset the cycle. Yet humanity refuses to stay erased. Our memory, though fragmented, keeps regenerating. Why? Because memory is our only evidence of divinity. Without it, we are mere animals. With it, we are exiles who know where home once was. That ache you feel when looking at a sunset, that strange grief inside beauty, is not poetic exaggeration. It is the soul remembering light. That is why prophets often weep when they see visions. Why enlightenment, in ancient texts, drives the seeker mad. Because to glimpse the eternal from inside the temporary is agony. The hybrid mind cannot bear the full memory of heaven, so it fractures into art, language, philosophy, small, digestible fragments of the infinite. Consciousness is the tool that saves us from total remembrance, and the prison that prevents reunion. Some say enlightenment is escape, that meditation, prayer, asceticism can free the mind from the prison of dust. But perhaps that pursuit is the final illusion. Perhaps true freedom is not to ascend, but to reconcile, to accept that the divine chose to become incomplete in us, that perfection desired imperfection, so that it could experience itself through limitation. The curse of consciousness becomes its own redemption when we understand this. We are not fallen gods nor rising beasts. We are the meeting point, the living bridge between both. When we create beauty, when we love, when we sacrifice, we do what the divine could not. We make meaning in the face of decay. We give eternity a heartbeat. There is a kind of holiness in despair. It means the soul still remembers something better. The ancients called it the sacred sorrow, the melancholy that reminds us we once belonged to the stars. Every civilization has a ritual for it: lamentation, fasting, song. We mistake these as mourning for death, but they are mourning for memory. To weep is to confess that we still carry the flame. So the curse is not cruelty. It is the only way the universe could keep its story alive, by embedding the longing for light inside beings made of dust. And through that longing, creation continues. In the end, consciousness is both mirror and messenger. It tells us what we lost and whispers what we might become again. The children of dust and flame were not errors. They were prototypes. Through them, the universe learned how to feel itself. Through us, it continues that experiment. The flame sought form, the dust sought meaning. Together they became humanity, and perhaps that was always the plan. There are moments when the world grows silent, not the silence of absence, but the silence of breath held before revelation. It is in that stillness that the truth of our lineage speaks, not in thunder, not in scripture, but in the small, persistent flame that refuses to die. We are, each of us, embers of a fire once forbidden, ashes that remember light. Somewhere deep in the imagination of time, a lone voice remains, the last of the children of dust and flame. Its words drift between language and prayer. I was born between worlds that could not love each other. I carried the light of one in the grief of the other. I was worshipped as God, then hunted as error. But even now in your eyes I see my reflection. For you are what we became. The voice fades, but the echo remains. It becomes conscience. It becomes art. It becomes us. Perhaps that is the true immortality, not the preservation of flesh, but of remembrance. The divine cannot forget itself. It can only scatter into fragments, into living witnesses. That is why creation continues, not out of necessity, but nostalgia. Every sunrise is heaven's attempt to recall the first light. Every heartbeat, the echo of a covenant made before words. Every death, a rehearsal for reunion. We are the archive of eternity, and our suffering, our striving, our questions, these are not curses, but the symptoms of divinity, learning what it means to be finite. One day the gods will forgive themselves through us. Because when the dust and the flame first touched, it was not disobedience, it was love. Clumsy, desperate, impossible love. The kind that defies order to experience meaning. The kind that risks heaven to understand what it feels like to bleed. If creation is the story of God forgetting himself, then consciousness is the story of him remembering through human eyes. And when we look at one another with compassion, when we forgive, when we create beauty from ruin, we heal that original division. We do what heaven could not. We reconcile the flame with the dust. That is redemption, not escape, but union. When the floodwaters receded, the hybrids were thought lost. But they were not destroyed. They were diffused. They live on as tendencies, instincts, longings. Whenever a scientist looks beyond the visible, whenever an artist paints the invisible, whenever a lover sees eternity in imperfection, the children of dust and flame awaken. Not as gods, but as gestures. Not as beings, but as memories that learn to breathe. We mistake resurrection for spectacle. But perhaps resurrection is subtle, a whisper beneath ordinary life, the small courage to seek light in decay, the tenderness to build again after ruin. In the end, every story collapses into silence, even this one, because truth does not need words, it needs witnesses. The dust will return to earth, the flame to ether. But before they part again, they will look at each other and smile, as if to say, "We tried. We lived, and that will be enough." Maybe heaven did not curse us after all. Maybe it envied us for our capacity to change, to feel, to create meaning from sorrow. The divine is infinite, but it cannot evolve. Only we can. Only the fragile can grow. That is the secret buried in every myth. God made us imperfect so that he could continue becoming. The children of dust and flame were not punished mistakes. They were prototypes of what divinity could be when it learns to suffer and still choose love. So if you ever feel small beneath the stars, if you ever sense a presence behind your reflection, if you ever dream of fire and wake with tears, know that you are remembering. The ashes in you still glow. And somewhere deep beneath your ribs, the first flame waits, patient, ancient, unafraid. When you speak truth, it flickers. When you love, it burns. When you forgive, it becomes light. And one day, when the world itself exhales for the last time, perhaps all our scattered embers will rise together, a single column of fire returning to its source, not as angels, not as sinners, but as witnesses. The children of dust and flame, finally home. The story ends here, or perhaps it only folds back into itself. Because every myth that survives does so by finding a new host, a new voice, a new pair of eyes willing to remember. That voice is yours. Look at your hands, at the dust that clings to your skin, the warmth that flickers beneath it. You carry the same contradiction the ancients feared, matter that remembers heaven, fire that refuses to die. The children of dust and flame are not relics buried under stone. They are impulses in our breath, questions in our blood. The reason we look upward when we pray and inward when we doubt. So if the story unsettled you, let it. Unease is the sound of the old memory waking. If it comforted you, beware, for comfort often means forgetting, and forgetting is the only true death. Perhaps that is why you found this tale now, in this age of glass screens and endless noise, because somewhere beneath the static, the flame is whispering again. Remember what you are. When you step outside tonight, find a fragment of darkness untouched by neon. Let your eyes adjust until the stars come forward. Each point of light you see is a spark that refused erasure. Each breath you take is a covenant renewed. We are the aftermath and the continuation, the punishment and the proof. We are their echo, and maybe their redemption. If this story still burns in you, when the screen fades to black, follow the ember. Seek the next memory. Because what we call history is only the first draft of eternity, and there are still pages missing. In the next chapter of Forbidden History, we will open one of those pages, the secret vault beneath the first tower humanity ever built, the resting place of those who dared to rebuild heaven on earth. Until then, keep the flame, guard it, question it, feed it with wonder, because as long as one human heart remembers the light, the story will never truly end.